Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the weekly news show that is so dastardly that it's being banned left and right from all sorts of platforms. If you're watching us live right now, congratulations, you're part of the minority who's figured out how to do that because, well, all the folks who watch live every week at my YouTube channel can't do it this week because my channel has been frozen because I had a friendly interfaith dialogue with a Jewish man named David. Totally friendly, nothing. We actually agreed on everything pretty much. And somehow they got the impression that that was hate speech. I think it was obviously a computer generated algorithmic error, but we're still stuck banned. And so you can't watch this live on my channel this week. And worse is still to come. Vimeo has banned No Lies Radio for the crime of, get this, questioning the received version of violent events, whatever that may be. So if you think that Pearl Harbor was a setup by the Roosevelt administration, as every single serious historian who's actually read about it thinks, you probably can't say that on Vimeo, or nor could you talk about the long list of other confirmed false flags, nor can you speculate about the ones that haven't been fully confirmed yet. All of that is verboten. This is outrageous. So people, please get on our email list. So as we get banned from various platforms, we can find a way to reach you and tell you where we're going to be broadcasting. And secondly, please send us money. We're saving up to buy our own server. And once we do that, then there's no way that we can be fully deplatformed. Helen, your thoughts about this obscene tidal wave of censorship that's crashing down on us?
Well, I mean, it was bound to happen at some point because these platforms are controlled by people who don't take kindly to the truth. So, I mean, basically, yeah, what you said about getting money to build your own servers, people have to start moving to their own platforms or to platforms that have made it very explicit in their declaration of state of purpose that they support free speech, which, of course, now you can't even say that you support free speech because people equate that with Nazis, which, again, it's one of the biggest propaganda coups they ever pull off was making the word truther a negative thing. So, I mean, free speech now is a negative thing. And they're just piling everything on the heap. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, there are some platforms still left out there that value independent thought, but there aren't a lot of them, and we need to support the ones that do exist.
Well, yeah, I know back in 1951, somebody from the Capital Times local newspaper here in the Madison, Wisconsin area asked people at the 4th of July event whether they would sign something which was actually the Declaration of Independence. And nobody would sign it. They all said, "Get away from me, you commie." And so that incident has been held up as exemplifying the way the McCarthy era was so oppressive. But today, I think it's even worse. As you say, now, if you support free speech, you're a Nazi. If you support the First Amendment, you're a Nazi. And if you want to have a friendly interfaith dialogue between a Muslim and a Jew in which they really like each other and get along and pretty much agree on almost everything, I guess you're a Nazi? I don't get it, but that's what happened to me with this radio show I recorded with David. He seems like a really great guy, and he's very pro-Jewish religion. He's a very strong, fervent, practicing Jew, and I'm a Muslim, and I don't endorse, I don't believe the same thing that he believes, but we got along great. How could this be hate speech? And I don't know. I'm just flummoxed by that one.
Well, I mean, it's as far as that goes, Facebook last year, I think it was, removed the Declaration of Independence as being hateful. And so it's funny that you mentioned that McCarthy thing because we are living through history once again, for sure.
I think it's worse now, but at least people understand that it's worse. Our first story this week is a new Pew poll, Pew Research Associates, showing that U.S. mistrust of government is on the rise. 69% of Americans say the federal government is intentionally withholding important information from the public, and the other 31% are fast asleep, I guess. 61% say the news media intentionally ignores important stories. Can you say, like Jeffrey Epstein during the last 10 years that we've been talking about it? So I guess the people aren't quite as stupid as you sometimes think. But why they won't rise up and overthrow this tyranny, I'm not sure.
Yeah, this was a reassuring, at least to see that people are paying some attention. I mean, it's still, they might not know what stories are being missed out on, some of them, but I think that a lot of people at least maybe not a lot of people, but maybe about half the people are smarter than we give them credit for. I mean, there have been polls that say that the majority thinks that something funky went down on 9/11, which, I mean, you would have to be, again, fast asleep. People, they stay quiet because they don't want to get ostracized from their comfortable position in society or whatever. But when they are in the private of their own minds or with their own circle of friends, they might be able to speak up a little bit, or at least appreciate other people's speech if they don't speak up themselves.
And here we are talking with a circle of at least a few thousand people who are keeping up on all of these things that the government and the media are hiding from us right here at False Flag Weekly News. And one of those things, you talked about something funky going down on 9/11. Well, one of the funky things that went down is that more than 1,100 human bodies were completely vaporized. That's 40% of the victims in the towers that were taken down in demolitions. 40% of those victims were vaporized, not as much as a bone fragment or a fingernail or a tiny scrap of flesh, a single cell of flesh has ever been recovered despite the most meticulous sifting and bucketing efforts in all of history. Every fragment, every grain of dust from what was left at those sites, which wasn't much, was carefully gone through. They didn't find a single keypad from a single telephone, they said, not a single filing cabinet, nothing. Everything vaporized, including every single cell and scrap of bone fragment of 1,100 people. This is still reported in mainstream news, and people aren't drawing the obvious conclusions that an extraordinary means was some extraordinary explosive was obviously used that utterly annihilated all of those people and turned all of this material into the equivalent of talcum powder, which floated down all over the city. How obvious can this be? How can people not be getting this?
Well, again, I think people do get it. They just don't want to say anything because nobody wants to have their career destroyed as being one of those, they're crazy truthers, because truth is bad, ignorance is strength. That's the only thing that's the only explanation that I have, because they really are just rubbing it in our faces, and I think a lot of people are afraid to speak up because their careers, their precious careers, and unfortunately, the people who control the output of news media don't want anybody talking about this because they can trace it back to the ruling class, basically.
And there are some people in high positions who do talk about this. And of course, I've had many of them on my radio show over the past, almost 15 years. But here we have a really interesting opportunity to get high profile, highly media visible people on the record about 9/11, at least saying something positive about the 9/11 truth movement. And that's actually happening right now in Iowa. There is this Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth supported push on the ground in Iowa to get the Democratic presidential candidates to talk about this. And a bunch of them have. Biden's wife, Jill, tells 9/11 activists to, quote, keep fighting. I don't know if that means that Joe is going to be a friend of ours policy-wise, but that's interesting.
Joe is not going to be a friend of ours. No, Joe is not going to be a friend of anybody's.
More interestingly, Kirsten Gillibrand says she's heard about the problems with explosions. That's a direct quote from her. She knows about the quote-unquote problems with explosions, and she wants a new investigation. That's much more promising. And then we have Cory Booker's aide giving the truthers a thumbs up. We have de Blasio ordering his aide to review AE 9/11 truth materials. And we have Marianne Williamson, the most out there of the candidates, saying that she's fully on board with architects and engineers. She knows all about Building 7. And she says that 9/11 is an example of how, quote, evil has got control of the United States. So maybe I'm going to have to vote for Marianne Williamson. She's the one who's speaking the most truth here.
I would have liked to hear what Tulsi Gabbard had to say, but apparently he didn't see fit to approach Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, she would seem to be one of the best candidate possibilities. I mean, there are some problems with Tulsi Gabbard. Of course, none of these candidates are perfect, but I would like to have heard what she said to this guy, because, I mean, he's got a picture up there with him and Amy Klobuchar, which I'm sorry, there is no hope that Amy Klobuchar will ever be anything other than just a singularly horrible person. But the same thing with Cory Booker, who thinks that BDS should be illegal. But yeah, I'm sure that his aide really appreciated the 9/11 literature, and I'm sure that Cory Booker used it as toilet paper. So the problem is that you get this stuff to their aides, and it's never seen again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that some of their aides are lovely people, but the people themselves are, for the most part. I mean, Marianne Williamson seems like a nice person, and if a little out there spiritually or whatever, at least her heart is in the right place, which is more than I can say for most of the other people, except possibly Tulsi. And no, Bernie, no, he showed his true colors in 2016. But yeah, Tulsi and Marianne Williamson are the only ones that I would say are not soulless monsters.
It kind of looks that way, doesn't it? Well, Tulsi, well, she came back after being in the military and so on, and apparently was very disillusioned with the 9/11 wars. And I assume that 9/11 truth is probably one of the reasons. So maybe we can get a blurt out from her at some point. Well, more 9/11 news. It's still making news all these years later. Lucky Larry Silverstein is still bringing art students to the World Trade Center. The 9/11 art students are, of course, the stuff of legend. The country was flooded with the biggest Israeli espionage operation targeting the U.S. in all of U.S. history. Actually, it was the biggest foreign espionage operation against the U.S. on U.S. soil in all of U.S. history. That's the FBI talking. And many of them were art students who were casing all kinds of sensitive installations, and they were all over the alleged 9/11 hijackers during the run-up to 9/11. And Larry Silverstein brought more art students into the Trade Center right before 9/11, and it actually was before Silverstein bought the rest of the Trade Center. There were, Swiss, German art students up there doing all kinds of interesting work with total blueprints, access to the entire place with no name badges. And they were doing structural work, tearing out windows and putting up platforms and things like that, right exactly in the plane impact zone. So art students in the World Trade Center is a really bad sign.
Yeah, I mean, when the new One World Trade Center went up, I mean, I made a tasteless joke that, okay, well, now they're going to fly another plane into it because now we have a new building to focus our spiritual energies on. But I mean, if he's got art students up in there, who knows? Maybe I was right. But yeah, the Israeli art students thing was funny because that was one of the infamously memory hold things from Wikipedia that. I mean, if you look into what certain intelligence agencies have been doing on Wikipedia, they completely memory hold the whole art students thing. You can look at the history of, there's like this art student scam article, and if you go back and look at the history, you see it turn from like a pretty well-treated description of the Israeli art student phenomenon into this generic like art student tourist scam thing that doesn't have any meaning to really anyone. And I mean, if you know how these editors work their tricks, it's a very skilled job. But I mean, anybody who thinks that they can get valid information on Wikipedia is delusional.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, so where do we get valid information? Well, I actually helped break the story of the art students of Gelatin, who are suspected of possibly having been involved in prepping the demolitions. Certainly anybody who was ostensibly with Gelatin at that time had total access without any problem from security all over the towers at the time that the demolitions were being prepped. And I broke that story with the help of another brave Jewish truth teller, Jonathan Elenoff. I think he's retired from our alternative media profession at the moment, but he dug up all that information. He's the guy who broke the story. He did it on my radio show. So if you want to find the truth, you need to pay attention to these kinds of alternative media outlets, not Wikipedia. So what's all this 9/11 stuff about? Well, obviously it's about the war agenda. The 9/11 wars have killed, taken out 32 million Muslims, 27 million of whom have actually been killed by direct or indirect effects of the wars. And the latest country targeted is Iran, where we're seeing quote unquote escalatory violence. Washington blames it on Tehran, but I don't think so. The Revolutionary Guards over in Iran have escorted a British tanker to port for failure to respect international maritime rules. And the Trump administration is chortling and chuckling about, oh, we got exactly what we wanted here. We got the Brits versus the Iranians. We're going to break the Brits off from Europe and bring them over to our side. Helen, do you think that this radically increases chances of actual shooting war with Iran?
Yeah, I mean, the Brits make us look competent at this point with all the mess they're going through with Brexit and everything, and Theresa May being unceremoniously shown the door, which should have happened years ago. I mean, they really like now Boris Johnson is in, he has all the reason in the world to stage a big war to shore up everybody's failing support. However, I mean, obviously there's no way that, I mean, if the US can't do it, the Brits certainly can't do it. I mean, they can't even protect their own ships. So like, I I don't think this is going to end well for anybody, but that's not the point. It's never been about ending well. It's about bringing about the end of the world, according to Pompeo and Bolton and all of these psychotic nut jobs. So yeah, I don't like where this is going. Obviously, I mean, I don't see this being Iran ramping up tensions. Iran doesn't want to ramp up tensions. They have no interest in doing that. But of course, the US and the UK do, because I don't know. They both, maybe it's the sense of their failed glory as from their empire days. They feel the need to revisit this, and they just are pathologically incapable of realizing that they're these hollowed out neoliberal shells of their former selves. But I mean, why do you have to drag the rest of the world down with you guys? Why can't you just reminisce in the private of your like senility?
Well, I think this is all part of a steady drip, drip, drip of war propaganda. Instead of having one big explosive Persian Gulf of Tonkin incident to set off problems with Iran, instead they're having these series of very smaller incidents, and they're hoping the cumulative effect of all of these smaller incidents will add up to a tidal wave of pressure against Iran, and possibly, ultimately, they could pull off the big grand finale of the fireworks display and start an actual war if that's what they're going to do. And they're lying about many of these incidents. In our next slide, we see the Iranian military has shown there was no drone downed in the Straits of Hormuz, as we claimed. Yet another, so many of these stories have turned out to be exaggerated or sheer lies. And even over in the UK, this whole tanker tit-for-tat thing between Iran and Britain is all orchestrated by Bolton. According to the UK Guardian, we see in the next story, this is a piece by Simon Tisdall, who is apparently fully aware of who's behind all of this, and he doesn't really appreciate the UK being dragged into Bolton's crusade.
Yeah, I mean, nobody should. Bolton, I mean, he's already tried to destroy this country, and this country, for whatever reason, isn't having it, which is a pleasant surprise. But like I said, the Brits are so busy trying to get their own thing to function correctly. I don't even know what thing means, their own ship of state to be righted, that Bolton is just being able to do whatever he wants, pull whatever strings he likes, and get them to dance. That thing with the drone is really funny because it's Trump's way of waging war, or waging his version of war, is just by sheer BS. Like I whenever you hear of like a magnate, a very rich person who's done something with some particular industry, I call Trump a BS magnate, because he has just made his entire reputation, his entire career based on just bragging, boasting, and there's nothing to back it up. He didn't have the money he's always said he has. He's claiming to be downing all these drones, and it's not actually happening, but it works somehow. He's the president. So that's, I mean, he's a BS magnate for sure.
Well, we're living in the society of the spectacle. It's gotten worse and worse ever since De Boer wrote that book back in the 60s. Well, I thought it was interesting here that Bolton's reaction to the seizure, well, first the seizure of the Iranian ship, and then the seizure of the British ship, his initial reaction was, he said, quote unquote, "This is excellent news." It reminded me a little bit of Netanyahu's response to 9/11. On the very day it happened, when the Twin Towers were blown up and almost 3,000 people murdered, they asked Netanyahu what he thought, and he said, "It's very good." And then he stopped and caught himself and said, well, I guess it's not good, but it sure is good for Israel. And we have Bolton basically chortling the same way about this problem for the Brits, which, of course, people like Simon Tisdall and other people over in Britain who appreciate their own national interests do not appreciate it at all. And in Spain, they don't like this either. Josep Borrell, who's Spain's socialist foreign minister, is apparently very, very unhappy that the Brits have invaded what he considers Spanish territory to do this seizure on Iran. And so it's all chaos and confusion. And so far, the U.S. really only, or Israel has the U.S. on its side in its attempt to force Iran to stop supporting Palestine. But it isn't clear that any other country is fully on board with the Americans, even the Brits, even after all of this.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's actually true, because the Brits are talking about that. Yeah, they want to negotiate. They don't want to. They're not talking about military solutions. I mean, even as much as they might like to think that they're capable of some sort of military solutions, they know that they're not, because they got their ship jacked. So like they know that they can't stage a war against a country if they can't even protect their own shipping. So yeah, it's definitely the U.S. doesn't respect international sovereignty. Why would they respect Spain's? More and more countries are going to be cutting themselves off from the U.S. in the future as it imposes more and more ridiculous sanctions on everybody, I think, because they're just going to make it impossible to do business in the world. If you're, I mean, Trump's solution to the U.S.'s flailing economy has been to just slap sanctions on everybody and make them trade with the U.S., which it's not like we have anything to trade. We have empty slogans and war machines that don't even work. Nobody wants the F-35 because it doesn't work. They'd rather have Russian-made things that do work. So, I mean, this is not a sustainable business model.
Well, we have these really great pieces of green paper use in your bathroom if you want. Anyway, so Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, says that the U.S. is dragging the U.K. into this conflict, which is obviously true. There's a lot more truth coming out of the Iranian side than any other side on all of this. And then he explained that they grabbed that British tanker because it didn't respond to a distress signal from an Iranian fishing boat and then failed to respond to warnings from the IRGC, which is probably a more accurate description than you're going to get from the Americans or the Brits. And speaking of bad actors, how about the Saudis? I mean, they're like as bad, if not worse, than the Israelis these days. And now they're inviting U.S. troops back into Saudi territory after they were all moved sort of, either stripped of their official uniforms and everything or moved over to Iraq and elsewhere after 9/11. That was part of the purpose of 9/11, was to sort of reestablish American hegemony over Saudi Arabia, where in August 2001, the King of Saudi Arabia announced that it was time for a parting of the ways. Saudi Arabia was leaving the U.S. empire. Why? Because the Saudi people couldn't stand U.S. support of Israel. And then, of course, 9/11 happened, and the nukes were targeted on Mecca and Medina and Riyadh. And just like Bush threatened Pakistan, threatened total annihilation on Pakistan. And so Saudi Arabia was reeled back into the U.S. orbit. The anti-American Saudi brain trust was all assassinated or imprisoned. And now we have Saudi Arabia utterly and completely occupied by the Likud Zionists trying to bring back American troops into Saudi Arabia. I don't know if this will work, Helen. I think most people in Saudi Arabia, including the religious establishment, are not going to like this.
Well, I wrote this article here, and I mean, it's the Saudis know, at least the ones that have their grip on power now, know that if the Americans decide to forsake them, it would be simply a matter of time before the popular sentiment, shall we say, takes them out. Because, I mean, they got nothing to back them up. They need the U.S. to fight their wars for them, and they're losing in Yemen. They're failing everywhere else. Yeah, they're inviting the U.S. in because they can't run their own show. And that's really bad because the U.S. can't run its own show either. So you've got two like incompetent Keystone Cops style like forces there. I mean, the fact that these two extremely wealthy countries can't even put down the rebellion in Yemen, which is because, people defending their land are inclined to fight off much more well-armed and well-moneyed adversaries. But for some reason, the U.S. hasn't learned this lesson in 50 plus years. So I don't know.
And so we're sending U.S. troops into Saudi Arabia where they're just more targets for Iranian missiles. I mean, this is so stupid. Yep. The whole reason we can't attack North Korea is they've got our bases in the region under their gun. And the Iranians with all those rockets have the same situation. Sending more troops just gives them more targets.
Yep, that, and yeah, the bases in Iraq, they fire these like stupid little Israeli Iranian rockets into Iraq, and say the Iranians did it, but they forget that those rockets are the ones they use to say that Hamas did it. So they're saying that Iran fired these rockets. No, Iran has real weapons. They don't need to fire your fake ass rockets. So but it is true that if Iran wanted to, it could take out all of the U.S. troops in Iraq and Saudi Arabia and in the Persian Gulf and basically everywhere, because they're sitting ducks. These aircraft carriers are these multi-billion-dollar sitting ducks. The weapons technology has evolved way beyond aircraft carriers, and the fact that we're still using them is embarrassing.
And of course, the Dimona nuclear installation in Israel is also fully within range of Iranian rockets. Well, so they're actually pushing, I think, for other forms of warfare, not a direct big-time military war against Iran. And Sigel Mandelker is in the middle of this, and she's been exposed recently both by The Atlantic, which did a profile of her, pointed out that she takes this Israeli occupation of the Treasury Department. She's working there at the what's it called, the part of the Treasury Department that goes after terrorists, right? The anti-terrorist wing. And so she can freeze people's assets. And so she's waging war on Iran on behalf of her home country, Israel. She was born in Israel. She's apparently still an Israeli citizen. And yet she's running this U.S. fiscal war on Iran. And in this article in The Atlantic, we find that she takes all this personally because she's a child of Holocaust survivors. And she's so proud of the 1940s Treasury Department's role in freezing Nazi assets. And so she thinks she's doing the same thing now. Another example of this kind of paranoid psychosis that you find among so many Zionists.
Yeah, I mean, Gilad Atzmon calls it pre-traumatic stress disorder. It's insane that we have dual citizens in our government. Israel doesn't allow that. We shouldn't either. That's really, really stupid. I mean, how do you justify that? Like, Israel thinks we are insane for doing that. So if they have a dual citizen and they want a government position, they have to give up one of their citizenships. That's common sense. Otherwise, you get this kind of divided loyalty. I'm not even going to say the other phrase because it's probably going to get the video removed. So it's ridiculous that this woman is running anything in the Treasury, and she should be booted out on her ass. But that's not going to happen because the Treasury has been Zionist occupied territory for the better part of a century. So.
And she's leading the war on the New Horizon NGO, which has sponsored conferences in Iran that I've attended every year since 2013. So I take this personally, and people who were planning to go to the next New Horizon conference in Lebanon have been visited by the FBI and told they will be arrested for attending a conference and discussing things with fellow intellectuals and authors and journalists. That's where it's all come to, thanks to this Zionist-occupied Treasury Department's war on Iran and war on America and war on our Constitution. But The Atlantic won't tell you anything about her dual citizenship. To find out that, you have to read Alison Weir over here at Israel Palestine News or at If Americans Knew. Here is Alison Weir's story on the same thing, pointing out that she's clearly born in Israel, likely an Israeli citizen. She was a partner at Proskauer Rose LLP, a powerful politically connected international law firm with ties to Israel. She is Israel all the way. As you say, she should not be running anything here in the U.S. And speaking of Israeli control over the U.S., are they going to choose our next president? Well, that's the tenor of the next story here. I don't know. This somehow I hope it hasn't got this. How could they get a more Likudnik Zionist president than Trump anyway?
Well, Nikki Haley would be one. I mean, she's like John Bolton in a human female suit, except like she's younger, so she'll be alive for longer. And I mean, I don't get her motivation because she's not from that. She doesn't come from that culture. So why is she so psychotic? I don't know. Does she have a brain parasite? Does she have, like, what is going on there? I don't understand what Nikki Haley gets out of this. I mean, she's not, is she one of these, like, doomsday Dominion
She's
Christians?
a little off. Yeah.
I really
She has. See, I don't understand why the Zionists have anointed her as the next president. They're all saying she's the one, but I don't see her demeanor as being something that's likely to win over people. She looks a little off to me. I mean, as you say, brain parasite or something. I mean, maybe it's the Zionist brain parasite, but I don't see how that's going to lead her into the White House. So, okay, another aspect of Zionist and criminal control of our government, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is continuing to make headlines every week. So let's move on to that. He was found in his cell in the New York jail where he's been held without bail. And they found him in a fetal position with marks on his neck, presumably not having been attacked by a vampire. They say maybe he tried to hang himself or maybe he tried to fake a hanging attempt. And there's this hitman, a cop who worked as a mob hitman named Nicholas Tetaglione, who's apparently his cellmate.
In his backyard.
Yeah, you can't make this up, can you? Okay, so you're going to give Jeffrey Epstein a cellmate who is a New York cop who did hits for the mob. Am I missing something, or is this a bad decision?
Well, I mean, I understand why he's in the cell with a cop, because they've got him in protective custody. That's what they do with child molesters. And obviously dirty cops. They put them separate from other inmates. So that part is logical.
Okay.
The marks on the neck, the mysterious. I mean, I don't think that this cop did it because, as some other commentator has already pointed out, he's already killed 4 dudes and buried them in his backyard. If he wanted to kill Epstein, Epstein would be dead. You look at the guy; he's jacked. He's a big, muscly, scary guy. If he wanted to choke out Epstein, Epstein would not be existing any longer.
Mm-hmm.
However, I can see it being like one of these trying to get get let out on bail. Oh, my life is in danger. Let me wear electronic monitoring device and hire my own security and fly around in my private plane while I'm supposed to be awaiting trial. That's much more likely. I mean, I can see the possibility that somebody would want to take him out. I don't think a lot of somebodies would like to take him out because they're worried about the blackmail material he has on them. However, they're probably fighting over who's going to get to do it because there's so many people who want to take him out. So that, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why he's still alive is that they can't decide who's going to get to do it. I mean, for all we know, somebody was in the process of trying to assassinate him, and then somebody else from some other blackmailee who thinks he's got a dead man switch ran in and stopped him, thinking, hey, if he dies, there's going to be a lot more blackmail material on us coming out. So who knows? I mean, there are a couple possibilities there, but I don't think that this dirty cop with the 4 coke dealers buried in his backyard had much of anything to do with it.
Okay, that's probably a red herring. I would tend to agree with you on that one. So Vanity Fair is publishing Epstein stuff. They went down there and talked to employees of the St. Thomas airstrip. I've actually been through there a few times. Certainly not in the company of anybody like Jeffrey Epstein. Anyway, these employees say that Epstein has been flying children in there right up through very recently, just this year. We've been talking about him on False Flag Weekly News for, in my radio show for over a decade. And he's been just doing this the whole time, right up until almost now. It's mind-boggling.
Well, it's when you at the end they say, well, we didn't know who to tell or if anybody would care, and that's the whole thing. Because if you look at the names that he had in his book and the names he was flying around in his plane, he had everybody in his pocket. I mean, he had blackmail material on literally everybody. So they could have sung like canaries and nobody would have paid attention because, like, what are they going to do? Out themselves? I mean, he really had some dirt on everybody. So, I mean, maybe there's one guy out there that wasn't corrupted, but the chances of finding that one guy are needle in a haystack style.
Yeah. So there's a guy working in the control tower on St. Thomas says, he'd stand on the tarmac in full view of my tower and board his private jet with children. Another employee says, we'd always be joking, how many kids are on board this time? Ha ha. Wow. This is all going on this year. Anyway, I'm glad somebody finally grabbed him, even though who knows why that really was done. There's probably a nefarious agenda behind all of this. And how about this Epstein associate nobody's talking about, Junkerman, this Nicole Junkerman, German-born Israeli intelligence operative who's based in London. I thought this piece was very interesting, and it brings out how Epstein is presumably an Israeli intelligence asset. She may be his controller or one of his controllers, and Ehud Barak is very close to her and close to Epstein, and he's just right now trying to beat Bibi Netanyahu in the elections this fall. Netanyahu is using the Epstein scandal to smear Ehud Barak. So maybe the Bibi people actually are behind grabbing Epstein.
That's what I was just about to say. Yeah, I mean that's the only explanation that I can see for why Epstein got nabbed now is because Bibi wants to get Barak out of the picture. And so fortunately, the world benefits for the first time probably by something that Bibi is doing. I don't think anything he's ever done has benefited humanity in the past. But this, perhaps, if Epstein is stopped from plying his trade, for once,
Bibi, we salute you. You've got my vote for Antichrist.
Seriously. This was an interesting article, though. I had never heard of this woman, and there's definitely not a lot of information about her running around. She's linked to a lot of extremely powerful people. There was one problem with this article is that he's saying that, there used to be a lot of information about her available, and now most of the web pages have been scrubbed. Okay, so what was on the scrubbed web pages, dude? You're gonna tell us? So that's a little weird. I don't like when people do that. Oh, well, there's all this other information that is really juicy, but I'm not going to tell you it because it's not available anymore.
And because I'm hoping that somebody will come and rub me out, so the information will never see the light of day. I mean,
yeah, seriously, like you want to get the information out there. That's the whole point of when you're dealing with stuff like this. You want to get it all out there while you're still around to do it. Yeah, this is I don't think that she's necessarily his Mossad handler, because he's already flying around on the private plane when she's on it with him. I mean, it's possible they were both Mossad
That's too
agents
obvious.
that happened to. Yeah, it's like he already had the private plane. How did he get the private plane? He didn't make his money by any normal means.
Well,
by
Wexner,
any.
Les Wexner, who's top man in the Zionist International Crime Syndicate, basically created Epstein and apparently
Yeah.
has a
So he
personal
didn't need to
sexual
get
relationship
recruited.
with him.
Yeah, he didn't need to get recruited by her, but it's possible that they were plotting something or sharing trade secrets or some other thing. I don't know what the relationship was, but I like how the guy said that, yeah, at age 27, she was way too old for him. But
Well, one of the
yeah.
interesting lines here was, if I disappear anytime soon, remember, it was probably the Mossad. And a lot of journalists would probably
That's
say that.
given for anybody. That's given for anybody who's writing about Epstein. But I thought that Carbine 911 thing is absolutely terrifying. This program that supposedly to help emergency victims hijacks all electronic devices in the vicinity to give all relevant information about one's location and the environment and every single thing. When you've got a world of smart devices, that's completely terrifying.
Yeah.
That is one of the scariest company ideas that I've heard, and I've heard
and handing
really
that over to the
company
Israeli Mossad and organized crime.
Yeah.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
Yeah. That's terrifying. And she's on the board of the NHS. Well, bye Britain. I mean, sorry, your health data is toast. But I mean, your health data was already toast because Google's got it all. So I don't think that she's adding a layer of threat there, because Google is already going to hand over all of its stuff to the Mossad. It's not like they don't have people in there. But yeah, this is an interesting one to watch for sure.
So now let's move to the bunch of a series of articles about organized crime. I thought that was really the highlight of our week's stories, in particularly the Ron Unz article and the Mint Press article. But the next article is Epstein the Satanist. This is from Veterans Today. I think I know who wrote this, and it's not one of the named editors there. And it goes over this satanic pedophilia thing, claiming that that's very much relevant to how the world is governed. What do you think of this stuff, Helen?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a series of blackmail rings that are used to control powerful people. I mean, we see this with Epstein. We see this with the Vatican. I mean, we see this with it's a time-honored way.
Are these people Satanists, and are they in contact with demons?
I don't think so. No, then that's I mean, they might think they're communing with demons. They might be psychotic. I don't believe in a Satan. I don't think that there is an evil being outside of human minds that is somehow making people do bad things. I think people are perfectly capable of doing bad things on their own, including this kind of stuff. I think people might worship an idea of Satan and then devote their bad things to it, and then it acquires power that way, which may as well be the same thing. But yeah, I don't know. The whole satanic thing seems to be abdicating responsibility for your actions to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your point. But as far as the empirical question of whether there are these organized satanic cabals out there operating with the top people who tend to be very, very high IQ and wealthy, all the way down to the lowest level kind of street people who are literally street people. And this picture, we've seen this in Nick Cook's book, The Franklin Cover-Up, the Franklin Scandal. And he provides some pretty good documented evidence that such is the case, that we may...
I mean, they do have this...
Go ahead.
Yeah, they do have these like ritualistic things they do, which, like I said, it ends up amounting to the same thing, whether or not there are demons that they're communing with or not. But like the Marina Abramovic stuff and the satanic ritual abuse and all that, it's creepy stuff for sure, and it's just adding another layer to the separating. I think it actually helps to make for victims who might want to come forward, it helps to make their stories less believable, because who's going to think that they're like sacrificing children on altars or whatever? If they come out and try to go to the press, they're going to be like, you're crazy. Whereas if they just said, oh, well, so-and-so powerful person touched me in my no-no place, then they're going to be more likely to be believed, because that happens all the time.
And of course, that gives the perpetrators plenty of motivation to do the really insane stuff, because nobody will believe them. And we see this pattern over and over and over. Well, moving on to the organized crime articles, here we have the Mint Press article about the Roy Cohn blackmail ring involved with the Bronfman crime family. that is really behind what Epstein's doing. Roy Cohn, of course, created Donald Trump. He was Trump's mentor. There wouldn't be any public figure named Donald Trump if he hadn't been created out of whole cloth, really, by Roy Cohn. And we learn that this was all part of the Meyer-Lansky crime organization. James J. Angleton of the CIA, who was a spy for Israel, as well as head of CIA counterintelligence, was part of this group. So these people were all blackmailing each other with this horrible, pictures of their bad sexual acts, often with minors. And I thought this article was very, very informative, as was the next one, Ron Unz's American Pravda, The Power of Organized Crime. And I would say, if you're going to read two articles from this week's list, read these two, because I think your understanding of how power really works in the real world and in the US of A will change dramatically if you don't know this information, and most people don't. This is very well documented stuff, and it really gives us the sense that our country is run by organized crime, which I think it is.
Yeah, the Whitney Webb story I thought was really, really good. I mean, she's one of the best reporters out there today, I think, and she's smart to have pulled up stakes and left the United States, I think, or if she always lived overseas, I'm not sure. But that article and this one, I would agree, are the two that people should read, because this one, I had never heard of some of the people in this story, and I've read a lot of books about organized crime. And this was really interesting, because I had no idea that they had just like for one thing plundered all the Japanese lands and sold them off at like pennies on the dollar to their powerful friends.
That's how the Chicago mob took over California, on the back of all of that stolen property from the Japanese. That's a little-known story.
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting stuff. I mean, Ron Unz is also one of the best long form journalists that is writing right now, I think. I mean, his American Pravda series is if you want to be quote unquote red pilled, I mean, that's where you should go. But these two stories really sort of prove that this whole organized blackmail ring thing is nothing new. This has been going on since the beginning of this country, since before that, back in Europe, and it's the way things are, unfortunately. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't try to stop it. We obviously should, but it does just show how entrenched these things are, and the like I said, the likelihood of finding the one uncorrupted authority figure. You basically have to play the figures off against each other, like Bibi versus Barack. That's the only hope of getting these people to go down.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe Fidel Castro proved the only way to get rid of these scumbags is through revolution. Castro led a revolution, and then he didn't have a liberal democracy. He had an authoritarian police state where all of these scumbags could be captured and dealt with. And honestly, I think that's the only way we're ever going to do it. But moving on to the offshore crime base of these scumbags, and it's not some little island in the Virgin Islands. That's Epstein's private island. That's nothing. The big island is called the State of Israel, which is a home for international scammers and frauders, as this article from last November.
Infuriating. This article was infuriating. Oh my God. Yeah, these people are getting.
Yeah, they don't extradite. So yeah, if you're an organized crime figure, just go to Israel, and you can sit there in Israel scamming people anywhere in the world, and they won't touch you.
Yeah, they'll welcome you with open arms, because hey, it's money. It's like, seriously. So you're just gonna open your arms to every criminal, every criminal that makes above a certain money.
Why do we blame Nigerians for this stuff? Maybe we should just use the word Nigerian from now on to refer to these people. We're not allowed to talk about Zionists or Israelis or, God help us, Jews. So from now on, let's just talk about Nigerians.
It's like Italians get the bad rap for the mafia, and then the Nigerians get the bad rap for these internet skims, and it's the Israelis pulling the whole thing. I mean, this is disgusting. This is utterly disgusting behavior.
So the ex-prime minister of Nigeria can't go to Switzerland for fear of war crimes prosecution. That's our next story. He was prime minister of Nigeria during the war, Second Lebanon War in 2006, and the 2008-2009 Operation Cast Lead against Gaza. So Omar, stay home in your crime base. We're going through the crimes of Zion quickly because we're a little behind schedule here. In this next story, yeah. This story was a big one this week. Israel is ramping up its demolition of Palestinian homes in Wadi Hummus on the West Bank. And in the next story, I think we have another good slide. of
You want to destroy your neighbor's house? Just build a wall too close to it, and then you can knock down the house, and nobody's gonna blink twice. Oh, the international community will condemn you, but we know how much their condemnations mean because there's nothing to back them up.
And apparently, you know, Israelis who went out to celebrate the massacres in Gaza, watching thousands of Palestinian civilians being blown to bits or burned to death with white phosphorus, watching the ambulances being targeted, watching the UN installations being targeted, watching the schools being targeted with children in them, watching kids playing soccer on the beach being mown. I guess they didn't watch that because they couldn't see the beach from the Israeli hills, but they watched the rest of it. They come out to watch this stuff and cheer for it and have barbecues. And they do the same thing when Israel destroys Palestinian homes. Here we have Israelis coming out and watching, and we have the military guys, the people doing the demolitions, all cheering. They love demolishing Palestinian homes. And talk about celebrating demolitions. Remember the dancing Israelis who celebrated the demolitions of the World Trade Towers, were caught doing it, held for 2 months, determined to be Israeli spies, and then sent back to Israel, where they went on television and bragged about having been sent there to, quote unquote, document the event, taking pictures of themselves, flicking lighters in front of the burning and exploding Twin Towers. Those pictures have now been released under a FOIA request, but they blacked out all the good stuff, so you can just see parts of those pictures. So yeah, Israelis celebrating demolitions. That's another meme.
Yeah, and if you doubt that it's like the actual country of Israel, and you think, oh no, it's just the leaders. Look at the comment section on that Times of Israel article. Mm-hmm. It's all people
saying, all celebrating demolitions.
How dare they say bad things about them for celebrating the demolition? That was great that those things were knocked down. It was all comments like criticizing that it was slammed, and it's like, see, you people are psychopaths. I'm sorry, you're psychopaths.
Well, have you seen the pictures of the kids on Purim? Purim is the Jewish holiday celebrating the massacre of 70,000 Persians in order to protect the holy tribe. And every Purim in Israel, apparently, these kids dress up as the Twin Towers. There are pictures of, originally there were dozens, and most have been scrubbed from the web now, but there's still a number of examples you can find of all of these kids in Israel dressing up as the burning and exploding Twin Towers. So it wasn't just Israeli spies who celebrated their handiwork when they flicked lighters in front of the burning and exploding Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, and were then arrested and then released, but it's ordinary Israelis celebrate the murder of 3,000 Americans on 9/11 every Purim. I should have put up some slides of this. You have to see them to believe them. Kids dressed as these towers being attacked and
and they put a lot of work into those costumes too.
They're great costumes,
yeah, they're very well done costumes, which it's clearly a labor of love to be celebrating the murder of 3,000 Americans. It's really disgusting, and I mean, I feel bad for the people living in Israel who aren't psychopaths, but get out of Israel, guys. I mean,
Gilad Atzmon did. You can do it too.
Yeah,
and Miko Peled, there are a lot of heroic Israelis, but they're pretty much all ex-Israelis, it seems like.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to live with among all those psychopaths. This is a really disgusting.
And shooting children in the head for sport, that's also pretty bad too, and that's what they do over there in the IDF. In the next slide, we see the latest example here, and here's Gideon Levy. He's still in Israel, and he's still telling the truth and outrage.
Yeah, he's one of the ones who I'm wondering, how does he deal with living among these complete nut jobs?
Yeah. That's a good question. This just happened, a week or something ago, a couple of weeks ago. I think it was just last week, actually. They at the end, the demonstration ends. People disperse. There had been a few teenagers, or kids throwing rocks from 30 meters away, where the rocks probably couldn't even come near the soldiers in their body armor. And then the demonstration disperses. So the snipers find some kid sitting in front of his parents' house hundreds of meters away and just blow his brains out for fun. And this is not an anomaly. It happens all the time, and these soldiers never get even a wrist slap. Chris Hedges reported watching Israeli soldiers luring Palestinian kids within range of their guns in order to shoot them dead for sport. He wrote about this in great detail in his article Gaza Diary. And the British Medical Journal published an article documenting more than 600 such cases of Palestinian children being shot down by Israeli snipers while they're walking on sidewalks, while they're playing in schoolyards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Israeli army hunts children for sport. And guess the Israeli government loves it. Ayelet Shaked cheers for it and cheers for killing not only the little snakes, meaning the
Little
children,
snakes.
but the mothers of the little snakes, the mothers. And there's the T-shirt that the IDF loves to wear, a one shot, two kills, showing a pregnant Palestinian woman with a target on her belly. These are the people of Israel today.
Yep, and I've had people arguing with me on Twitter trying to say that T-shirt is a hoax. No, that T-shirt is not a hoax. There's multiple versions of it, for one thing. There's a lot of different versions of that shirt going around. It's real, and they do enjoy killing children for sport. Like I said, I don't know how Gideon Levy and the other sane Israelis stand it, because I mean, these people are bloodthirsty psychopaths. Ayelet Shaked is a bloodthirsty psychopath. Bibi Netanyahu is a bloodthirsty psychopath. The entire government and a lot of the citizens are bloodthirsty psychopaths. I just, what is in the water over there? Or is it just they propagandize them from such a young age that they just love to revel in the murder of defenseless children and handicapped people and medics and journalists and, you know, the kind of people that killing them is a war crime.
Well, they fly their kids to Auschwitz and take them on tours of Auschwitz. There's that great film. It's an Israeli film. It's called Defamation. Please watch the film Defamation. It's a documentary showing how the Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, is completely just making everything up, totally full of it. And it follows these Israeli kids being brainwashed, being taken to Auschwitz and being brainwashed into believing that everybody hates them because they're Jewish. Everybody wants to exterminate them. That nice man on the park bench, he's a Polish guy and he's not Jewish, so he wants to exterminate you. That's what you see in that film, and no wonder they're all psychopaths. That's how they grew up.
Yeah, and those hotel guests complaining about you running around screaming in the hotel at night. They hate you because you're Jewish, not because you're keeping them awake at night. Come on, man, this is insane. I mean, and even they got the one tour leader aside, and I just rewatched this the other day, which is why I can remember the exact scenes. But they got the one tour leader aside for like a few seconds, and even he admitted that what he was doing was maybe not like morally on the up and up, like, you know, all this reveling in death and stuff, and you know, maybe we're giving them the wrong idea. But yeah, you know, I'm getting paid.
Yeah, right. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Well, how about calling for assassinations? These Zionists seem to be, or Nigerians, I'm sorry, YouTube, please don't ban me. The Nigerians seem to think that they can call for assassinating top leaders of powerful countries and get away with it. And indeed they can, and they do. Dr. Lionel Kopelowitz, the former head of the UK Board of Deputies, calls for the assassination of Jeremy Corbyn. He said, let's make a Corbyn, or Korban, meaning a ritual sacrifice, slaughtering an animal by cutting its throat. Let's do that to Jeremy Corbyn. And this just happened last May, and it reminded me of what happened a few years ago when the editor of the Jewish Times of Atlanta, Georgia, Andrew Adler, called for the assassination of President Barack Obama in an op-ed published in his newspaper. And the Secret Service paid a visit to him and had a cup of tea with him and left and didn't even slap his wrist. If a Muslim leader, the editor of the Muslim Times, called for the assassination of the American president, somehow I think there might be more consequences than that. But these people have a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Their home would be firebombed, man. Their home would be firebombed. I mean, this is ridiculous that they can get away with this sort of thing. I mean, and that this guy who called for the assassination of Jeremy Corbyn is clearly not the first one. I mean, Mike Pompeo has already said, "Oh, well, we'll make sure he doesn't become prime minister." And I mean, obviously, they would be prepared to go to great lengths to assure that, because, you know, you can't just like stand outside the ballot box and stop people from voting for him. So they would have to get rid of him by other means. But this is really disgusting. I mean, it's like, what, Barack Obama didn't give Israel enough money or something, and he signed a $33 billion over the course of the next 10 years.
He wouldn't go to war with Iran. His crime was not going to war with Iran. So that's why they put Trump in power.
Poor babies. Oh, I feel so bad for you. Ugh. I mean, have patience. The next 4 years, you'll get your super ultra mega Zionist president. I mean, super ultra mega Nigerian president. Whatever.
So yeah, all of this war in Iran for Israel stuff is really a big distraction from the bigger war, which would be on China. At least that's what Steve Bannon thinks. In the next slide, we see the war on China news begins with China signing a secret deal with Cambodia to use a Cambodian naval base here, according to Sputnik. And of course, the U.S. is allegedly trying to counter this alleged secret agreement, which is, of course, being denied. But what do you think, Helen? Did they really make this agreement?
Cambodia is a wholly owned subsidiary of China at this point. They own more than 55% of the country. So this wouldn't surprise me at all. I'm surprised they had to sign an agreement. I'm surprised they don't just own the harbor outright.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they don't just own the harbor outright, because Cambodia is completely wholly owned Chinese subsidiary at this point. They have all these casinos there. There's no building regulations, so they're just bulldozers everywhere. You want to get around in any of the port cities, you can't do it because there's just earth moving equipment everywhere. The Chinese putting up casinos. They shut off the water to the shore hotels because they don't want them there. They want to put up more casinos. I mean, Cambodia is, unfortunately, it never really recovered from the whole Khmer Rouge thing. I mean, they've got a former Khmer Rouge battalion commander running the country, and he's got the Chinese grandfather. So he gave the country to the Chinese, sold the country to the Chinese, basically. And Cambodians
so the dominoes are falling. That means that we better bring out the domino theory and stop them. And that's what Steve Bannon wants to do. He has revived the Committee on the Present Danger, a Cold War era relic that used to be all about fear-mongering about Russia. Now it's targeting China. Here we have another good story from Kurt Nimmo. Salute to Kurt, who left InfoWars right when InfoWars became a Zionist propaganda outfit. And Kurt is still doing great journalism. This was a pretty good article about Trump and Bannon pushing this new anti-China Red Scare. But from a geopolitical perspective, actually worrying about China makes more sense than worrying about Iran.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does, and it's not like you can keep flogging the Islamic terrorism dead horse because after 20 years or so of being told to be afraid of one thing, you're not going to be afraid of that thing anymore. So he's smart to move on to China, but it's like starting a war with China. You really think we're going to win that? I mean, your article, which I think is next, you pointed out that we can't even win wars against third-tier countries like Afghanistan and Yemen. I don't think we're going to have much of a chance against China. So best to just simmer down a little, Bannon, simmer down.
So yeah, my article in the Crescent would be the next slide that goes over this history of the 1992 Wolfowitz Doctrine, saying the U.S. must prevent the rise of any new rivals, and basically it's talking about Russia and China. Fast forward to 2018, and James Mattis pivots to Asia and says, okay, no more fake war on terrorism. Now we're going to go after Russia and China. Apparently, though, Israel hijacked the presidency and put a spanner in the works there. In the next slide, we see that more war on China news could be around Hong Kong, right? China has these issues with some of its sort of quasi-territories, including Hong Kong, and they just seized 4.4 pounds of TATP, high explosives, that's commonly used in Islamic terror false flag scams.
Would have been the most colorful color revolution on the history of the planet. I mean, they're really going all out with this Hong Kong protest thing. I know that you said the explosives are planted, but this Hong Kong thing has all the trappings of a color revolution. They're so happy to have finally gotten their hooks into China that they're just going for broke. They're trying to say protesters are killing themselves because they're so frustrated about not being able to get what they want from the Chinese government. No, they already got what they want on like the first day they got the extradition thing thrown out. So why are they still protesting? This is color revolution. This is not planted by the Chinese government. This is some George Soros nonsense.
Looks that way to me, but at least they haven't taken out all of Hong Kong's power supply and blamed it on China. But that's what they're doing to Venezuela. We had more than half of Venezuela's 23 states, including Caracas, lost power last Monday, and they blamed it. The Venezuelan authorities blamed it on an EMP weapon, and that's what the U.S. Air Force brags about. In the next slide, there's a video promoting these wonderful Boeing lights-out weapons. It's called the Champ, and it can hit specific buildings without collateral damage. Apparently, they've been targeting the infrastructure, especially a particular dam in Venezuela that provides power to the country.
Yep, and they're boasting about this. Oh, this was previously something only available to Hollywood screenwriters. Oh, yay, we have super futuristic death machines now. Let's just eradicate all life on this planet. Leave Venezuela alone. They've suffered enough. Move on.
Okay, so they've got a lights-out weapon. It looks like it could be lights out for the human race if we let these people continue building all these insane weapons. And finally, in the next slide, we have a somewhat different perspective on that. No, nobody will be able to set off all these really horrible weapons because the ET aliens will prevent them. According to Robert David Steele.
Robert David Steele.
I thought this was a very interesting piece. Some people on our False Flag Weekly News team thought it was horrible, hideous, disgusting. We shouldn't even talk about it. It's so bad. But I actually agreed with probably at least half of it and only disagreed strongly with a very small bit of it. So What do you think, kind of a short version of this whole ET issue, ET disclosure that's tied in with Zionism and pedophilia and Jeffrey Epstein and yada, yada, yada? Do you think Steele's take on this is true?
I didn't make it through Steele's ramblings because the dude likes to hear himself talk. He likes to make things up while talking to make the bits of truth that he does leave in there totally discredited. So, but as far as aliens, if there were extraterrestrial intelligences and they looked at this planet and they looked at what we're doing, they would pass it by and give it a wide berth. So I don't see aliens getting involved in our nonsense. If they were smart enough to have intergalactic travel, they would realize that getting involved with humans is a losing game, and they wouldn't want to do it. I mean, it's possible that long ago they might have paid a visit if they exist. I'm not saying they do. I think it's statistically improbable that there's no other life in the universe, but I think that we probably wouldn't recognize it as life because it's probably got some other completely unique form of consciousness and is unrecognizable. I mean, probably looks like rocks to us or looks like weird sponges or something. But if Robert David Steele is correct for once, and aliens did see life on, I mean, I didn't get through the article, it's like too long, but is he saying that aliens seeded life on this planet? Is that what he's saying? Is that
I don't know if he said that, but what he says, there are good aliens and bad aliens. The bad aliens are the reptilians that David Icke talks about that are behind all of the terrible things we talk about on false flag. Okay, well, anyway, I think we have absolute proof.
Warring aliens. Yeah, no, humans are bad enough. Let's leave the aliens out of it.
Well, they're probably leaving themselves out of it, as you say. I think we have absolute proof that there can't be any aliens anywhere near Earth because they would have picked up the broadcast from False Flag Weekly News from a couple of light years away, and they would have decided to stay clear of this planet. So I guess we're doing our job here, preventing alien invasion. So that's a good reason to keep us going. Send us money so we can get our own servers, so the aliens or the Nigerians or whoever it is can't keep shutting us down and deplatforming us. Thank you so much, Helen Bajnicki. I love doing the show with you. Keep up the great work. Keep feeding us those great RT stories, and we'll talk to you next time. And thank you, all of our viewers and supporters, and take care. See you next week.